Brian Mulroney. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Lloyd.
So good to hear from you. So what's your take on the way this is turning out tonight?
Well, I think warmest congratulations to Prime Minister Harper. He will be the first Conservative leader in 50 years since Mr. Diefenbaker to win a majority and 2 minorities, and that's a tremendous accomplishment. And Jack Layton, who's gone from pretty well nowhere to a remarkable success tonight, and he deserves great congratulations as well. So it's a very exciting night, unexpectedly so, Lloyd.
And why do you think this has happened, sir?
Well, I think that the Conservative government was re-elected because of its economic competence. They made that the issue in the campaign, as well as the need for a majority and a stable approach to some of the problems we're going to encounter. And I think that Mr. Layton successfully became the incarnation of change beginning in Quebec. People were fed up with the Bloc Québécois, and he emerged as a symbol of change, somewhat surprisingly because he had been around for a while, but always perceived, as they say in Quebec, as un bon Jack, a good guy. And he was born here, raised here. His father was, I was privileged to have him in my cabinet and caucus. And as I've said before, Bob Layton, his dad, was one of the finest men ever to sit on the floor of the House of Commons. And so Jack has some of those attributes.
And what do you make of the Liberals coming out third? First time ever for them being the third party.
I think, Lloyd, that is the story of this evening. That is if you're looking for historical import, and we've just mentioned 2 that are significant, Mr. Harper's victory, Mr. Layton's victory. But in history, I think the larger one, or the largest one, will probably be what has happened to the famous Liberal brand tonight. For 110 years, the Liberal Party dominated Canadian politics because of its unbelievable strength here in the province of Quebec. And now that has gone, as, for example, the National Energy Program drove away the Western support, the patriation of the Constitution over the objections of Federalists and Separatists in Quebec, hurt them badly here. And the culmination of it all is what you see tonight. The Liberal Party, the once great Liberal Party, in some significant difficulty. And a legitimate question is, given the success of the NDP and its positioning now, is there an important role for the Liberals in the future?
Mr. Mulroney, we are going to ask you to stay with us for a second because we have something important to do here. The C2B decision desk has been working at those numbers, and here's what we're saying. It is a Conservative majority government, a Conservative majority government. So after 2 minorities, Stephen Harper finally gets there with it, a majority.
Can I ask a question to Mr. Mulroney?
You may certainly ask a question to Mr. Mulroney as we look in on Conservative headquarters in Calgary. Bob Fife is here, Mr. Mulroney.
Mr. Mulroney, you called me the other day. Mr. Mulroney, you called me the other day and you said, how's it going? And I said, it looks like a Conservative minority. And you laughed, and that old smell of politics, you said, no, it's going to be a Conservative majority. So you still have your instinct, sir.
Well, I just thought that Mr. Harper was going to get a majority and said so publicly, Bob, and to you privately, because I thought he deserved it, and I thought the split that was coming on the other side of the equation was such that it would create the result somewhat like we've seen tonight. It reminded me, in some ways, of the dynamics of it in 1988 when I had the Liberals and the NDP on one side of the free trade argument, and I was alone with the Conservatives on the other, which gave us about 169 or 170 seats. And it's always easier when you've got 2 or 3 opponents on the other side splitting that vote, and you're hewing to the center or center-right, as has been the case very successfully for Prime Minister Harper tonight.
Mr. Mulroney, everyone is tuned into this across the country. All of our reporters are on the line. So Craig Oliver would like to ask you a question. All right? Craig, come on in. You're on, Craig.
Well, Mr. Mulroney, Do you feel somehow responsible for this kind of success? Do you feel that you set an example that Stephen Harper learned from?
Well, I don't. Mr. Harper didn't need examples from me to learn the business. He's been at it a long time, but he has, I thought, governed very moderately and very effectively. He's made good use of very talented people, and so I think that he deserved it and earned it all by himself tonight.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mulroney. I'd like to ask you, though, about one more important aspect of this evening, and you referred to it briefly, but that is Quebec and how Jack Layton should attend to Quebec now. What sort of approach should he make there?
Well, Jack has in his great success tonight, Lloyd, as you know, it contains the elements of a worrisome problem for him, and that's called expectations. People are going to expect a great deal from him, and they're going to expect him to deliver. And it's going to be extremely difficult for him to do that, certainly in the short term. But all he can do is continue to be the guy that he is, to put out his own philosophy. Quebec is a social democrat kind of area now, somewhat left of center, where Mr. Layton finds himself with his party. He's got some good people. I mean, after all, they've had 30 people on the floor of the House of Commons, and some of them are very talented, starting with Mr. Layton himself. And so if they are thoughtful and reasonable, and if I may say so, somewhat generous opposition, as opposed to the dogfight that we have constantly seen on the floor of the House of Commons, I think that'll go down well with people, and I think certainly in Quebec, and it'll be consistent with the kind of persona that Jack Layton has projected, and very much, if I may say again, in keeping with his family's tradition with his great dad, Bob Layton.
All right, Mr. Mulroney, we thank you very much for taking the time tonight to come to talk to us. We appreciate it very much.
Delighted to be with you, Lloyd, and you and I have been doing this a long time.
We have indeed.
It's been going on forever. So thank you for having me tonight.
Thank you, sir. Good night. Brian Mulroney, former Prime Minister, 2 straight Conservative majority governments, speaking to us from Montreal, and we appreciate that. And Craig has another Conservative luminary with him. He was the leader of the Reform Party for many years, started that movement out west, which has now morphed into the Conservative Party. Craig, go ahead.
Lloyd, it all started really with Preston Manning. If anybody's responsible for tonight, apart from the leader himself, it's Manning. And I guess I can say that next to Stephen Harper, he is probably the happiest guy in Calgary tonight. Is that right?
Well, I am, Craig. Yeah, it's been a long haul, but I want to congratulate Stephen Harper and the whole team tonight, and also Jack Layton. I don't agree with Jack on a lot, but I believe in replacing separatists from Quebec with federalists, and they've done that tonight, which is a real service to the country.
Where do you think Stephen Harper stands now in terms of how he will run a government as a majority leader? Will he be able to open up more? Will he be able to move to the center more? How will he govern?
I think there'll be far less tension in a majority parliament where the life of the government isn't on the line every day. So I think that will be the case, and I think they'll focus very heavily on sustaining his economic recovery. That's been his #1 priority all along.
But will it be more difficult for him now in the sense that he's always been able to tell some of his supporters, I can't deliver this or I can't deliver that because I've got a minority? Now, some of those people are going to say, we want some of these social policies which you said you couldn't get because you had a minority.
I think he'll do whatever you can do with 165 seats. I don't think Stephen will be timid about implementing conservative policy.
Just finally, give me your feelings from the very beginning. Did you ever imagine that the party you started again would become a majority in this country?
Well, you know, over 10 years ago, we thought if you could unite the right, if the left would divide itself, you could get a reformed conservative majority government. That was the hope. And it really has come to fruition tonight, so we're very glad that that's been the result.
Do you think that Canada has gone the American way? We now have really two extremes on the left and right.
I think the Canadian people moderate the extremes on both the left and the right. So I think we'll have a responsible parliament. I think all the politicians know this parliament has to deliver. It cannot be intensely partisan, and it can't get off on extreme tangents on either the left and the right. I think Parliament knows that, and the public expect it.
Well, Preston, I just want to say on behalf of Lloyd and myself, we're looking forward to being with you on a horse in August.
Okay, well, I like that. Okay, we'll do that. We'll do that, Craig.
Okay.
I'd like that, yeah.
Thank you, Lloyd.
Thank you, Craig. Not on the same horse, of course, because, that would be a little crowded.